Welcome to the Irish Farmers Journal Weekly Podcast.
Hello and welcome to this week's podcast. I'm Hannah Quinn Mulligan. Coming up on the show this week, farmer anger spills over at a NINA TB meeting.
I think there are far better ideas in which we can tackle TB, and I think where you can bring farmers on side and work along with the department. But I think that is a very poor proposal, and I think it's going to be detrimental to our export trade as well as to stigmatising people. And I think a lady spoke very strongly down here earlier about that, and I think that's a very dangerous road to go.
And how big a role are satellite inspections going to play on your farm in the future?
Post-2020, that we will move towards better imagery and more technology in dealing with our inspections. And we're going to reduce the level of inspections from 5% to 1% because of this new technology and because our error rate now in the European Union, arising from the good work of the paying agencies and the ministries, is down to 2.2%.
Now, it will come as no surprise to some that TB reactors have increased since this time last year. In a bid to engage with farmers on the issue, the Department of Agriculture, in conjunction with the IFA, has held a number of meetings across the country on the issue, with over 1,000 farmers thought to have attended. While they were keen to engage with farmers on the issue, as you can hear, tempers were running high.
Owen, first of all, you made a very good suggestion. There's lots of things we can do on our own farm to look at how we can improve it. But I think the notion or the suggestion that you should have categorisation of TB and you're going to publicly stigmatise people that have a reactor heard or have a bad record. It's grand the day you want to buy cattle, but remember the day you want to sell cattle, your name is up there in the lights as well. So you can't, and you have less people to buy your cattle. It would also perhaps affect our export trade. You talked about how important it is. We all know we have to get 9 out of 10 cattle off this island. And if we're trying to get continental markets, we're now publicising the fact that such a person in such an area has a record that mightn't be just as good as somebody else. And I think it's a very dangerous road to be heading down. I think it's a very poor proposal and a very poorly thought out proposal. I think there are far better ideas in which we can tackle TB, and I think where you can bring farmers on side and work along with the department. But I think that is a very poor proposal, and I think it's going to be detrimental to our export trade as well as to stigmatising people. And I think a lady spoke very strongly down here earlier about that, and I think that's a very dangerous road to be going.
Farmers speaking directly to department officials in Tipperary. After the meeting, I spoke to IFA National Health Chair Pat Farrell.
Well, I would say it was more frustration than anger, because people feel they're shortchanged in the whole live valuation scheme. And the same questions have come up at the 7 meetings we've had. It's the same team and it's recurring. People are not happy with the valuations. The income loss is not paying them for loss of production, and the hardship grant is it's just too little at $250 a month for 4 months, especially if you look at last winter where you had a 7-month winter. Sure, 4 months of a hardship grant is only half the winter or a little bit more. So people are frustrated at that, and they'd like to see a bit more progress. They'd like to see TB got rid of by 2030, but to a lot of people that's aspirational, and whether it happens or not is another thing.
So where do we go from here? Is it more badger culling? Is it more vaccinations? Is it stricter testing? Is it more blood test as opposed to skin test? Where do we go?
Well, the department have introduced the blood testing this year, so they're probably getting next year's reactors earlier, which is probably a good thing, but it'll take a little bit of time for that to feed in. We wouldn't be convinced that the badger vaccination is the way to go, because the Monaghan trial has shown there's been a serious breakdown this year, and until that's investigated and found what the problem is, we can't say it's the right thing to do to go ahead with the badger vaccination. I suppose the testing is outside our control, outside the farmers' control. That's up to the department to monitor the vets and make sure they're doing the job. But as farmers, we'd like to see TB got rid of, because we're paying 32 million into the scheme, and the scheme cost 84 million to run last year. So we're paying 40% into it. So if TB was got rid of in the morning, that would be a big saving to Irish farmers.
And is it going to happen? I mean, we managed to eradicate, say, brucellosis. I mean, what can we do to eradicate TB? What does the IFA want to do to eradicate TB?
Well, we have said that the department need to look at the chronic herds, they need to look at the chronic areas, and they need to deal with the wildlife and try and help farmers a little bit more than they are at the moment. The idea of putting your status up on a marked board, you saw there tonight the anger that was in the room, and that's been at the 7 meetings. And in fact, when it was mooted first, there was 12 resolutions into IFA on the subject from 12 different county executives.
Pat Farrell there. Another issue raised by farmers was valuations. According to the department, TB compensation has gone up 18% since this time last year, but farmers raised issues around valuers coming to farmers and the quotes they were given for animals. Colm Ford, Principal Officer of the ERAD division in the department, spoke to me about the issue.
I think any farmer who's unfortunate enough to suffer a TB breakdown, they never intended to sell those animals. So when the scheme goes into value those animals, they're getting the value of those animals if they had gone to sale that given week. And those were animals that weren't intended to be sold. So I guess they're not going to be... It's unfortunate that we're tied under EU law that you can only provide the market value of a particular animal. We try to be absolutely fair to farmers all around the country and making sure they get a fair market valuation.
There was a lot of concern raised around the independence of valuers as well, and a lot of kind of stories coming back from farmers saying that, valuers could see previous evaluations that were given and that kind of thing. I mean, is that allowed? Can you understand where that frustration's coming from?
Yeah, and I'd be cautious about maybe commenting on anecdotes. But absolutely, if you have a second valuation, the valuer should not be aware of what the first valuer had, the valuation he had arrived at. In terms of the independence, I mean, I outlined this evening that we have fair procedures in place, that valuers have summary of market prices to inform them of the ongoing prices for a whole list of categories of animals, and they have discretion in how they value animals. If farmers don't like the first valuation, they can then appeal it, and if they don't like an appeal valuation, they can then similarly go to arbitration. So I'm quite satisfied that the process is independent.
And how many valuers are there in the country, and have any ever been appealed, or have any kind of been brought up on charges or suspended?
So there's about 70 valuers throughout the country, and valuers are then asked to nominate the counties that they would be available for valuing in. I outlined earlier we have about 4,000 valuations in any given year, and only about 3% of those are appealed. So, I think the take-home message for me is that 97% of first valuations are accepted, which would imply that people are relatively satisfied that the valuation process is fair. As I mentioned earlier, we make sure that people are treated fairly, and valuers are then subject to we want to make sure that they perform their functions to a high level, and if they don't, then there are sanctions that can be imposed. And I think over the past 18 months, 2 valuers have been suspended for short periods of time, but at present no valuer is suspended from valuing.
Colm Ford there. Another issue that has caused consternation in the farm community is the idea of a herd's TB status being placed on a mark board during sales. I spoke to Owen Ryan, a Senior Superintendent Veterinary Inspector with the department in charge of TB policy, on the issue. But first asked him about the link between wildlife and TB, with 6,000 badgers culled and 1,000 vaccinated every year.
We've had a very effective badger wildlife control policy for the last 10 or 12 years. It's well established that badgers are one of the ways in which cattle can get TB. It doesn't happen in every case, but where there is a serious outbreak of TB in cattle and where it's linked through the investigations to badgers, we can remove badgers in those areas. But we also carried out research for the last few years showing that vaccination could actually be as effective an alternative as culling, and can deliver the same level of protection to cattle and to the farmers and the farm families. What we're doing is we're carrying out vaccination as policy now in the areas where it was already done, and we're incrementally expanding that across the country. We're going to continue culling as well when we need to. We're interested in what works, and where there is a significant outbreak of TB linked to badgers, we'll continue to cull. In other areas, we'll deliver protection to farmers and farm families by protecting their cattle through vaccinating the badgers. Now, it's going to take a few years to roll out because we want to do it right, and it's quite logistically tricky to get it started. But badger vaccination offers a real important additional tool that will deliver protection to cattle and to farmers. It'll continue as well as culling, and I think this will really help us drive down TB and deliver protection.
I think there was a point that was made about Monaghan, and we all know there was a bad breakout of TB in
Monaghan, and that there is a vaccination pilot ongoing in Monaghan as well. So the point was raised, is it worthwhile vaccinating if outbreaks of TB are continuing in these areas?
It is worthwhile vaccinating. The vaccine has been shown to be effective, and it does protect badgers, and protecting those badgers does protect cattle. There has been a significant deterioration of the TB levels in Monaghan. It's one of our black spots. We have an action plan to address that. But it's not correct that the levels just went down in the areas where there's vaccination of badgers. In fact, the TB situation in Monaghan disimproved significantly in areas where there was culling of badgers carried out, in areas where we had no wildlife controls at all because there hadn't been serious TB historically, and in the vaccination areas. If it was due just to the vaccination failing, then you would expect to just see the effects in the vaccine areas. That's not the case, and it hasn't happened. And the other areas of the country have continued to be effectively controlled. The cause of the Monaghan increase is multifactorial, and our action plan is addressing each of those issues. We're continuing to monitor and evaluate the effectiveness of the badger vaccination policy. We're going to keep doing that because we want to do what works and what's effective. But badger vaccination delivers protection to cattle and to farmers. So does badger culling. We're going to use both tools in the right way to deliver the right level of protection and get rid of TB.
In regard to wildlife, deer was brought up, foxes were brought up as well. I mean, going to deer, first of all, could you just outline, you gave some points there about how many deer had been culled in different counties and overall?
Yeah, so deer really, it's a tale of two different parts of Ireland. Wicklow has its own unique qualities with regard to deer. There's a huge deer population there. Actually, farmers are in the minority in Wicklow. Most landowners there are not farmers and are not farming, so there's particular circumstances there. And a department-funded study did carry out work that showed the same strains of TB were circulating in deer, cattle and badgers in Wicklow. It wasn't clear which was infecting which. Maybe they were all infecting each other. Outside Wicklow, though, there's simply no evidence that deer are playing a significant role in passing TB to cattle. That's not to say deer don't get TB at all, but the point is there's no evidence they're playing a significant role. We've tested... Did
you say it was 74 deer have been culled altogether, and some are in different counties besides Wicklow?
Exactly. So across Ireland in the last just over a year and a half, we've tested, I think it's 74 wild deer for TB. We've done that for free. There's no problem. If farmers want to shoot deer near them and arrange for us to test them, we'll do that. Only 3 of those 74 wild deer actually tested positive for TB. So for instance, in Clare in the last year and a half we tested 16 deer. None of them had TB. In Kerry we tested 39. Only 1 of them had TB. So the evidence just isn't there. They're playing a significant role. But if farmers have concerns locally in certain areas, we're happy to work with them, and we'll test samples for free if they arrange to have the deer shot. And of course they have to arrange with National Parks and Wildlife Service for Section 42 licence if they wish to do it out of season. But hunters, farmers, landowners can work together to do that. We're happy to support it. But it is just the case that outside Wicklow there just isn't evidence at the moment that deer play a significant role.
Something farmers were very passionate about was the idea of a TB status of a herd being viewed on a MART board. I mean, is that a likely possibility in the future?
There's a range of options that we can choose from how to reduce TB further. They were described in a policy options paper that we circulated out to all members of the TB Forum, all the farm organisations. We put out a press release on it and put it on our website months ago. One of those, and the one that seems to have got the most notice, was the idea of herd categorisation and enabling people to know the status of animals they're buying in. Now, there has been a reaction to that, it's fair to say, at public meetings. But it's also important to note, farmers who are dealing with TB or have just cleared of TB, the last thing they need is to bring in another person's TB problem. If you're engaging in contract rearing, have you thought about the TB history of the herd you're partnering with? If you're buying in a stock bull into a closed herd, have you thought about the history of that animal? So while it's certainly true that it may be difficult for farmers who find themselves categorised, it's important to remember that 97% of farmers do not have TB. And as well as taking care of the farmers who do have TB and helping them get clear and stay clear, we also have to deliver protection to the 97% of farmers who don't have it. There is a range of ways we can do it. One of it is to let farmers know what the status of animals they're buying in is. Now, if we agree collectively that that's not on the cards, there has to be some other choice that's as effective. Because if we keep doing what we're doing, TB will stay the same. It won't go down. If we're serious about reducing this terrible disease and having fewer farm families affected next year, we need to do what we're doing and do more as well. And really, it's easy to rule out options and it's easy to say what's not acceptable. The hard bit is saying what is acceptable and doing something more.
Owen Ryan there. Well, we all know that 2018 was a tough year for farmers financially, but perhaps we didn't realise just how tough it was until Teagasc released their annual report this week, saying that farmers' incomes were down on average by 15%. That was 22% for dairy farmers and 19% for suckler farmers. Our correspondent Thomas Hubert spoke to Teagasc economist Trevor Donlan about the situation.
Yeah, 2018 was quite a difficult year from the weather perspective, and for grassland agriculture it led to a substantial increase in feed use of over 40% in the case of dairy farms and over 30% in the case of dry stock farms. So that had a significant impact on the cost of production in dairy and in beef in 2018, and it is the main reason why incomes across those sectors were down in 2018. And if we look also then at the tillage sector, what we saw is a few different things happening in tillage. While the tillage yields, especially for spring crops, dropped quite substantially, in the end this was offset considerably by much higher harvest prices for cereal crops in 2018 compared to 2017. So the tillage sector actually didn't do too badly in the end, whereas all of the other principal systems of agriculture, the grassland agriculture in Ireland, saw reductions in income, and the biggest reduction in income in percentage terms was in the dairy sector, where incomes fell by 22%, or close to €20,000 drop versus the record year in 2017, whereas in the case of the dry stock sectors, the income reductions were a good deal smaller.
On dairy specifically, it was expected that it would be worse than this. We were looking earlier in the year at a halving of dairy farm incomes. It looks, as you said now, to be 22%. Has the good autumn helped dairy farmers?
Yeah, the good autumn has led to a significant turnaround in fortunes for the sector. In midsummer, we didn't have very good information on the increase in feed use. We knew feed use had increased a lot on farms, but we had no data or actual data on which to examine this. The situation by now is much different. We have good data on the increase in feed use, so we know that feed use increased by not as much as we thought in the summertime. And so that has meant in the end that the income story for dairy in 2018 isn't as bad as it was. And the other big factor that helped the situation was the fact that the good weather in the autumn meant that we went from a situation mid-year where we thought milk production in 2018 was going to decrease to one where it looks now like it will have increased by probably about 3% compared to 2017.
If we look at next year, you've given forecasts there for, I suppose, a reversing of the picture. All sectors recovering except tillage, which was doing well this year and is looking not to do so well next year.
Yeah, that's one of the difficulties we have for 2019. The tillage sector does look like it, even though we're expecting a recovery in tillage yields on the basis that weather conditions revert to normal, and we have a bigger tillage harvest in volume terms next year. Expectations are that prices are not going to be as high for cereal crops in 2019, and that ultimately is what would lead to a fall in income. That plus some cost pressures in terms of fertiliser, significant cost pressures in terms of fertiliser, which is a big component of costs on direct costs on tillage farms. The situation for the other sectors in 2019 is generally more positive, and the main story really for 2019 for dairy and for dry stock is that we expect farms to spend a lot less money on feed in 2019 on the basis that weather conditions revert to normal, grass growth is more typical of a normal year, and on that basis the volume of feed farms acquire in 2019 should be a good deal lower. There might be some pressure, all right, to continue to spend more money than maybe farmers would like on fertiliser, but that's a requirement really to try and build up fodder reserves, because that has been a problem as we saw in 2018. And if we did get difficult weather conditions at towards the back end of 2019, for example, then farmers would it would be a comfort to farmers to know that they had sufficient fodder reserves in place so that they didn't have to fall back on additional feed use.
Finally, a sector we don't talk about as often is pigs. Those stark figures here, an average pig costing the farmer €14 this year. Any sign of improvements for next year?
Yeah, it was a very difficult year for pig farmers. While they didn't have to deal with anything in terms of the weather problems faced by grassland and tillage farmers, the difficulty for pig farmers is they were caught in the classic price-cost squeeze, where the price of pigs fell substantially by about 13% compared to 2017. And then on the other hand, the cost of feed was moving upwards. So that squeezed the life out of margins in the pig sector. And as you said, the Teagasc estimate is that on average it cost farmers €14 in losses for each pig produced. For next year, the situation looks like it will improve. There are no pressures in terms of feed prices next year. We don't expect feed prices to be any different in terms of an annual average compared to 2018. And we do expect also a recovery in pig prices of the order of about 8%. So that should bring margins up. They won't be fantastic, but they will be better than what we've seen in 2018.
Stay tuned, because still to come we shed some light on the Ornua Glanbia kerfuffle and reveal how often a satellite inspects your farm.
Creed under pressure to lift lid on factories. In this week's Irish Farmers Journal, calls for full transparency after carcass trim revelations. We exclusively reveal how ANC payments could rise by up to €200 per hectare. Teagasc Outlook predicts rebound in farm incomes next year. Over 1,000 farmers are facing water fines of up to €5,000. And don't miss your free 32-page festive food magazine with top tips for making the perfect Christmas dinner inside this week's Irish Farmers Journal, on sale today.
Well, many of us will have grown up watching Kerrygold ads and dreamt that one day we too could be whisked off by a handsome German with a penchant for Irish butter. However, in recent times, things have become a little more serious, with Glanbia launching their very own truly grass-fed cheese range in the US, prompting farmers at the ICSMA AGM last week to ask CEO of Ornua, John Jordan, if the traditional grass-fed Irish brand had missed a trick. I spoke to John Jordan after the conference about the issue.
I suppose our headline is, look, Brexit is a bad news story, and any change to the status quo in terms of our trading relationship with the UK will have a negative impact. Even in a no tariff scenario, there will be cost increase, which make all Irish food and agriculture less competitive against the UK. And there's a risk of that, and in a tariff environment, that you'll end up with food inflation, which could impact demand. So as I say, anything that changes the status quo is a bad news story.
Another thing that might be changing the status quo is that Glanbia have launched a truly grass-fed range. And of course, Ornua has a strong reputation of working off the grass-fed image of Ireland. From Ornua's point of view, how do they view the truly grass-fed range?
Yes, but look, fundamental to Irish agriculture is the grass-fed system. And we at Ornua passionately believe that produces the best quality milk in the world. In terms of building a brand and investing in a brand, it takes a long time. If you take the US, we've been 25 years investing significant money year in, year out, and that has given us a position where we're in a premium brand position. We're able to charge the consumer more. We're the number 2 butter brand. We have a 23% cheddar market share in the specialty cheese, and puts Kerrygold in a very strong position. And certainly from our perspective, we'll continue to invest in Kerrygold, and we see significant growth for our brand in the US.
There was a wee bit of, fair flying in terms of farmers and what they were saying about Glanbia and Ornua. And one of the points they made was, had Ornua grown complacent in terms of, had Glanbia seen a trick that Ornua had missed in terms of pushing this cheese range that Glanbia have?
Yeah, look, I'd certainly very strongly push back that we have not been complacent. In the US market, in 10 years, our volume has grown 6-fold. In Germany, which is a key market for us, we've doubled in 10 years. They're significant volume growth and value growth and profitability drivers for our organisation, and they come about by the continued investment in the brand, in advertising, and indeed in innovation. And as I highlighted within the German presentation, we've gone from the position of being known as a butter brand to now having a very significant cheese business, and indeed a yogurt business where we sold 27 million pots of yogurt last year after launch in Germany.
It was also highlighted, one farmer brought in a newsletter from Glanbia that said that they'd approached you 14 months ago with this truly grass-fed idea. I mean, versus 14 months ago to where we are now, do you think that perhaps it might have been something to go into that range together?
For us, like the consumer, we worked together with Glanbia on this, and we mutually agreed that selling both brands under one umbrella wasn't the right thing to do. And we've different views of the research that came out within that. Look, ultimately the consumer in the US will decide on the success of brands, not what Glanbia do or Nua do. And look, we're very confident that we'll continue to see strong growth in the Kerrygold brand.
John Jordan there. And there is word that the December Ordnua meeting could again be pushed back. That's all well and good, I hear you say, but all we really want to know is who is going to take that horse to France. Well, moving quickly away from bad butter jokes, farmers will be aware that up to €40 per cow is available under the new BEEP scheme that will be in place next year. I spoke to Minister for Agriculture Michael Creed about the scheme, but first asked by asking about the live export trade this year.
Well, the fact that we're up 30% this year and last year, it would obviously be better if we were up more than 30%.
The turkey market in particular was a kick, was it?
It was, but I mean, the Spanish market is up substantially. We're, agreed new criteria with Libya, so there'll be boats moving there. So we're up 30% in 2018 on 2017. We were up 30% on 2017 on 2016. It's a really important, competitive issue for the industry to have as many buyers as possible. Live exports is really a critical part of that.
The Commissioner was here as well, so of course there was lots of talk about CAP. I mean, how are we standing on our strategic plan? Is it in the offing? Where is it coming?
Well, we're working on that, but I mean, my primary focus is on getting a budget for CAP, and that's not an easy one because we can have all the strategic plan and objectives on generational renewal, climate, all the other issues that are important, capping, part-time farming, etc. But without an adequate budget, they'll all be disappointed.
Commissioner Hogan said that no plan for CAP would be approved without generational renewal. I mean, I know we've done a lot in terms of taxation, but farmers are almost nostalgic about the early retirement scheme that used to be in place. Could something like that happen again?
Yeah, I mean, early retirement installation aid. The issue actually was the value for money reports that were done on those instruments didn't show that there was a return in terms of lowering the age profile, and that's what we really need to make progress on. So to look at previous instruments and look at what new instruments might be better or could be tweaked to deliver better outcomes.
There were some impassioned speeches around TAMS as well. I mean, there's still a TAMS underspend and the deadline is approaching. I mean, do we have any plans on what's going to happen with the underspend?
I don't understand the underspend.
The underspend, well, according to my colleagues in work, given 5 years into a 7-year programme, there's 160 million out of 325 million unallocated.
Yeah, but we continue to open TAMs, as you know, in tranches. And that's the plan that we will continue to open, except people are saying that we should close TAMs now and do other things. I haven't heard anybody say that.
Okay, so we'll see where we go on that. The other one is another one to do with CAP is very important, the issue of a genuine farmer. And I know you and I were at some meetings on CAP, particularly one in Charleville. I mean, what is a genuine farmer in terms of department?
I mean, to my view, there should be no real debate about this. Part-time farmers, to my mind, are active farmers.
You gave some details on the BEEP scheme, which is coming out next year. Can you share those with us in terms of will farmers have access to scales? How much will it cost to get scales?
Farmers will have access to scales. We don't envisage anybody having to purchase them, and the price would be moderate, probably in the region of 40-50 euros.
Now, would you prefer an in-person farm inspection or a satellite to come hovering over your farm? Well, Commissioner for Agriculture Phil Hogan revealed that a satellite passes over farms up to 3 times a week, and in-person inspections might become a thing of the past.
That's the plan in post-2020, that we will move towards better imagery and more technology in dealing with our inspections. And we're going to reduce the level of inspections from 5% to 1% because of this new technology and because our error rate now in the European Union, arising from the good work of the paying agencies and the ministries, is down to 2.2%. So I don't think we should be investing a lot of extra money in terms of providing labour costs for ministries at a time when the error rate is that low, and we should use a more risk-based approach.
There have been some complaints in the media about inspectors. Farmers have come to us, to the Farmers Journal, with letters regarding inspectors and complaints. Do you have an opinion on that and what the Department of Agriculture should do?
Well, we've made some changes in the last while in order to help the department officials to interface with their clients, their farmers, in order to make it as easy as possible for them to apply. It's 100% online applications. And in the future we want to ensure that the department are able to pre-fill a lot of those applications for farmers for their programmes in the future. So I think that technology is going to play a big part in helping to reduce the level of inspections, to reduce the level of bureaucracy for our farmers, which is what our overall objective is.
The Farmers Journal office sent in a collective bunch of questions for you now, so bear with me. So, have you received Ireland's Rural Development Programme amendment to implement the ANC review yet, and will you approve it when it goes in?
I will receive it before the end of the year, and obviously you can't approve anything without getting the application.
Okay. Also, there was a bit of concern inside and also in the office up in Dublin about the talk about Mercosur talks resuming in December. Where do we stand on that?
We've had Mercosur talks since 1999, and we'll have another one in December 2018.
And are you going to be part of them?
I won't be part of the negotiations.
Okay. And French proposals were made, supported by Irish farm organisations to restrict imports on agri-food products causing deforestation where they are produced. What's your standpoint on that?
Well, we'll observe international agreements, and we expect everyone else to do the same. But we do believe in the single market of the European Union, and people may not realise that we import a lot of product already from various parts of the world. And if we want to support trade, it's two-way street in terms of supporting trade. And we are bringing in the respect of deforestation in countries like Indonesia. We have brought in the European Parliament and the European Council have recently agreed legislation to limit the level of deforestation in return for products that are bought by France, in particular in respect of palm oil. So I hope that the French authorities will be able to implement a plan that will reduce their dependence on palm oil in Indonesia and improve the level of environmental compatibility.
You concluded inside by thanking the farm organisation and the farmers and saying that it might be the last time you were there in a capacity of Commissioner. Is that right? Or would you not run again as for Commissioner of Agriculture?
Well, it's a matter for the Prime Minister and Teagasc of the day to decide who's going to be the Commissioner. I'm in the final year of my term now, so of course I respect the decision-making this process, and it's a matter for the Teagasc, of course. Nobody knows the future.
There was a lot of heated discussion at the ICSMA AGM after the Commissioner and Minister spoke and answered questions. I asked ICSMA President Pat McCormick how he felt farmers were feeling in the room.
Well, I think the overall feeling is the farmers would like to know that the footpath of food production in this country, be it dairy and beef, that was made very, very clear. It's very, very obvious from both speakers and from the floor that there's a lot of concern out there about the environment and the repercussions of the environment if we don't tackle the environment and embrace the challenges that are out there head on.
And from the ICSMA's point of view, I mean, you raised some key points, particularly around Brexit, also around kind of processors and this talk of less than 30 cents per litre being paid for milk in 2019.
Yeah, certainly, first of all, to deal with Brexit. We are very, very dependent on what Theresa May can do. And, if you were to listen to the Commissioner and Minister Creed, they didn't give a lot of hope either that she's going to get this across the line. In fairness, there was a lot of good work done within Europe for the other 26 member states to agree with Ireland and to move it forward. It's purely a political decision now in the House of Commons, and we'll have to see what happens there at that point. Your other question then was obviously on milk price. I did say that we're 3 months, maybe longer, even into listening to processors talk down the price of milk. And even Minister Creed alluded to there, finishing up, that this time last year it was the same story. And thankfully we hadn't a reduction in milk price of any significance. And hopefully, with the German milk supply and the French milk supply under pressure, and particularly the Germans as a result of the drought, that 2019 won't be the year that was predicted. We have the statistics done on it. If milk prices to drop below 30 cents, it's the very, very same prices we got in 1998. And that would be totally unacceptable 20 years on, given the way the costs and inputs have gone at farm level.
There's a lot of talk about inspections as well, and Commissioner Hogan said that inspections might become 100% satellite inspections by 2020. Is that to be welcomed?
I'm not sure that it can be welcomed. It depends on how it's handled. The eye in the sky doesn't tell the whole story. Obviously, up to now, there was 5% of farmers, no more than 5% of farmers could have an inspection, but nonetheless, you could have 2 carloads of inspectors in the one day unannounced. And that created a major fear, and we heard a gentleman from Kilkenny there speak about a woman whose husband was abroad on the day in question when the inspector arrived, and she had a baby in her arms who was, I think it was 12 months old, and was or maybe 14 months old and was also expecting a child, and he was insistent on going ahead with the inspection, and that created a lot of personal trauma, because I know we represented that case in having common sense brought about. The other, what's mentioned now, is modern technology and the eye in the sky, and it was alluded to by the Commissioner that satellite passes over your farm 3 times a week. It's very, very hard in real terms to be 100% right 100% of the time, and common sense needs to prevail with those. Man from Offaly there mentioned that the sun was shining in a certain direction, and it gave an imprint right across the field of the hedge grove, and he had a major issue with getting that redressed. So until we have modern technologies fully in line with what's happening on the ground, it's something that farmers are going to be extremely apprehensive about.
And going forward for the ICMSA, we've got CAP coming up. What would ICMSA like to see happen?
Well, what would we like to see happen? It's absolutely imperative that the budget is maintained, and if there is a deficit, that the member states would make up that deficit. We obviously need a Pillar 2 scheme that's very, very farmer friendly from a commercial farmer's perspective, in order to bring us compliant from an environmental point of view, because here, listening to both gentlemen today, the environment is going to be a massive part of CAP, not just for the 2020 reform, but indeed beyond that into 2027 and thereabouts. From a Pillar 1 perspective, we need to minimise the losses to the smaller units from convergence. There was massive losses of internal convergence the last time around for people that had between 8 and maybe 15,000 euros of a payment, because they had a large payment per hectare but a small land base, and that needs to be prioritised to keep the structure that we represent, the small to medium sized farmer.
And that's it for this week. Thank you very much for tuning in, and remember, you can subscribe to the podcast on iTunes and Spotify, as well as following us on social media to keep up to date with all the farm news. The sound engineer this week was Ferdy Mooney, and I'm Hannah Gwynn Mulligan.
The Irish Farmers Journal podcast, online at farmersjournal.ie and on iTunes every Thursday.